James sat nervously in the small, dimly lit room of his family's modest home, clutching the acceptance letter from Acts of Apostle Academy. His heart raced as he read the words over and over. Asterisk, congratulations, you have been awarded a full scholarship. Asterisk, his mother, a hard-working seamstress, wiped tears from her eyes as she hugged him tightly. This is your chance, James, she whispered. Make us proud. The next morning, James packed his few belongings into a worn-out suitcase and boarded the bus to the city. As the bus rumbled through the countryside, he stared out the window, his mind filled with both excitement and anxiety. He knew the academy was a place for the children of the wealthy and powerful, but he was determined to prove that intelligence and hard work could overcome any obstacle. The gates of Acts of Apostle Academy loomed before James, their grandeur both intimidating and awe-inspiring. The campus was a sprawling estate with manicured lawns, towering buildings, and students dressed in pristine uniforms. James felt out of place in his simple clothes and second-hand shoes, but he held his head high as he walked to the administration office. As he entered the classroom, whispers and sneers followed him. "Who's that?" someone muttered. "He doesn't belong here," another scoffed. James ignored them, taking a seat at the back of the room. The teacher, a stern woman with a cold demeanor, glanced at him dismissively. "Scholarship student," she said, her tone dripping with disdain. James clenched his fists under the desk, vowing to prove them all wrong. The bullying started almost immediately. During lunch, a group of boys surrounded James, mocking his clothes and calling him charity case. One of them, a tall, arrogant boy named Victor, sneered, "You think you're smart? Let's see how long you last here." James kept his composure, refusing to let their words break him. That evening, alone in his small dorm room, James allowed himself a moment of vulnerability. He missed his mother and the simplicity of his old life. But he reminded himself why he was here, to create a better future. He opened his textbooks and began studying, determined to excel no matter what. Jane, the most popular girl in school, noticed James from the first day. Unlike the others, she wasn't interested in his background. She was intrigued by his quiet confidence and the way he seemed unfazed by the constant taunts. During a chemistry class, she deliberately chose to sit next to him. "Hi, I'm Jane," she said with a warm smile. James was taken aback. No one had been this friendly to him since he arrived. "I'm James," he replied cautiously. Jane's beauty was undeniable, but it was her kindness that caught him off guard. They worked together on the experiment, and for the first time, James felt a glimmer of hope that he might find a friend in this hostile environment. Jane was the center of attention wherever she went. Her fair, glowing complexion, elegant demeanor, and impeccable style made her the envy of every girl and the desire of every boy. But Jane was different from the others. She didn't care about wealth or status. She valued intelligence and kindness. When she started spending more time with James, the whispers grew louder. "Why is she hanging out with him?" people asked. Jane ignored them, standing by James during lunch and group projects. James, however, couldn't help but feel the weight of their judgment. "You don't have to do this," he told her one day. Jane simply smiled. "I want to." The rumors started soon after. "James is only friends with Jane because of her family's money," Victor declared loudly in the cafeteria. Others joined in, calling James a gold digger and a social climber. James tried to ignore them, but the accusations stung. Jane, however, wasn't having it. She confronted Victor in front of everyone. "James is 10 times the person you'll ever be," she said, her voice firm. "If I hear one more word against him, you'll regret it." The cafeteria fell silent, and James felt a surge of gratitude. But he also knew this would only make things harder for him. The first major test of the term arrived, and James was determined to prove himself. He spent every spare moment studying, often staying up late into the night. Jane noticed his dedication and offered to help, quizzing him on difficult topics. When the results were announced, James's name was at the top of the list. The class erupted in murmurs of disbelief. Jane beamed with pride, but the others glared at James with resentment. "Lucky guess," Victor muttered, but James knew better. This was just the beginning. The annual school dance was the most anticipated event of the year. Jane, as expected, was asked by several boys, but she turned them all down. "I'm going with James," she announced, shocking everyone. James, who had never even considered attending, was both thrilled and nervous. On the night of the dance, James borrowed a suit from a kind-hearted janitor and arrived at the venue with Jane on his arm. The stares and whispers were relentless, but Jane held his hand tightly, her presence giving him strength. For one night, James allowed himself to forget the challenges and simply enjoy the moment. Victor and his friends couldn't stand seeing James succeed. They hatched a plan to humiliate him during the school's science fair. They sabotaged his project, hoping he would fail in front of everyone. But James, with Jane's help, discovered their plan just in time. He worked through the night to fix his project, and on the day of the fair he presented it flawlessly. The judges were impressed and James won first prize. Victor's face turned red with anger, but James simply smiled, knowing he had outsmarted them once again. One evening as they sat by the school's fountain, Jane turned to James. "I like you," she said softly. "Not because of what others think but because of who you are." James was stunned. He had never imagined someone like Jane would feel that way about him. "I like you too," he admitted, his heart racing. But he also knew their relationship would face even more challenges now. The thought both excited and terrified him. After their wedding, James and Jane moved into a cozy home in the city. James had secured a job at a prestigious engineering firm, while Jane worked as a successful architect. Their careers were thriving, but they always made time for each other. One evening, as they sat on their balcony overlooking the city lights, James turned to Jane. "We've come so far," he said, his voice filled with gratitude. Jane smiled, leaning her head on his shoulder. "And we're just getting started," she replied. For their first anniversary, James planned a surprise trip to the countryside, where they had spent their first date. They revisited the park, the fountain, and even the small cafe where they had shared their first meal together. As they walked hand in hand, Jane turned to James. "Do you remember how nervous we were back then?" she asked with a laugh. James grinned. "I was terrified," he admitted. "But you made it easy." James's mother visited them in the city, her heart swelling with pride as she saw how far her son had come. Jane's parents too began to warm up to James, seeing how happy he made their daughter. During dinner one evening, Jane's father raised a toast. To James, he said, for proving that true worth isn't measured by wealth, but by character. James felt a lump in his throat as he thanked him, knowing how much those words meant. James was promoted to a senior position at his firm, a testament to his hard work and dedication. Jane celebrated his achievement by throwing a small party at their home, inviting close friends and colleagues. As they toasted to his success, James looked around the room, his heart full. "None of this would have been possible without you," he whispered to Jane. She smiled, her eyes shining with pride. One evening, Jane surprised James with life-changing news. "We're going to have a baby," she said, her voice trembling with excitement. James's eyes widened in disbelief before he pulled her into a tight embrace. Tears filled his eyes as he realized the depth of their love and the new chapter they were about to begin. "We're going to be amazing parents," he said, his voice filled with determination. Jane's friends and family organized a baby shower, filling their home with laughter and joy. James felt a sense of belonging as he watched everyone come together to celebrate their growing family. As they opened gifts, Jane held up a tiny pair of shoes, her eyes glistening with tears. "I can't wait to meet our little one," she said. James nodded, his heart swelling with love. The day their baby was born was the happiest day of their lives. James held Jane's hand as she gave birth to a beautiful baby girl. They named her Grace, a symbol of the blessings they had received. As James cradled Grace in his arms, he felt a surge of emotions. "She's perfect," he whispered, his voice breaking. Jane smiled, her heart overflowing with love. Grace grew quickly, bringing endless joy to James and Jane's lives. They celebrated every milestone, from her first smile to her first steps. One evening, as Grace took her first wobbly steps across the living room, James and Jane cheered her on. "She's just like you," Jane said, her eyes filled with pride. James laughed. "And she has your determination," he replied. When Grace started school, James and Jane made sure to instill in her the same values of kindness and resilience that had guided them. They often told her stories of their journey, hoping to inspire her. One day, Grace came home with a drawing of her family. "This is us," she said proudly. James and Jane exchanged a smile, knowing they had created a loving and supportive home for their daughter. James and Jane decided to take Grace on a family vacation to the countryside, where they had shared so many precious memories. They spent their days exploring nature and their evenings sitting by the fire, sharing stories. One night, as they gazed at the stars, Grace turned to James. "Daddy, do you think I can be as brave as you and Mommy?" she asked. James smiled, his heart swelling with pride. "You already are," he replied. Inspired by their journey, James and Jane started a community project to support underprivileged students. They provided scholarships, mentorship, and resources to help them achieve their dreams. One evening, as they reviewed the project's progress, Jane turned to James. "We're making a difference," she said, her voice filled with pride. James nodded, knowing they were paying forward the kindness and support they had received. On their 25th wedding anniversary, James and Jane renewed their vows in a beautiful ceremony surrounded by family and friends. Grace, now a young woman, stood by their side, her heart filled with pride. As they exchanged vows, James looked into Jane's eyes. "You've been my strength, my joy, and my greatest blessing," he said. Jane smiled, her eyes glistening with tears. "And you've been mine," she replied. When Grace left for college, James and Jane found themselves adjusting to an empty nest. They missed her dearly but used the time to reconnect and focus on their passions. One evening, as they sat on their balcony, Jane turned to James. "We've built a beautiful life together," she said. James nodded, his heart full. "And there's still so much more to come," he replied. Years later, Grace married and started a family of her own. James and Jane became doting grandparents, cherishing every moment with their grandchildren. One afternoon, as they played with the children in the park, Jane turned to James. "We've come full circle," she said, her voice filled with emotion. James smiled, knowing their love had created a legacy that would last for generations. In their golden years, James and Jane traveled the world, fulfilling dreams they had put on hold. They visited places they had always wanted to see, creating new memories together. One evening, as they watched the sunset over the ocean, James turned to Jane. "You've made my life extraordinary," he said. Jane smiled, her heart overflowing with love. "And you've made mine complete," she replied. James and Jane's story became an inspiration to many. They were invited to speak at schools and events, sharing their journey of love, resilience, and triumph. One day, as they addressed a group of students, Jane turned to James. "We've lived a life full of challenges and blessings," she said. James nodded, his voice filled with pride. "And we've shown that love and determination can overcome anything." As they sat together on their porch, watching the sunset, James and Jane reflected on their journey. They had faced countless challenges, but their love had always prevailed. James turned to Jane, his heart full. "Thank you for believing in me," he said. Jane smiled, her eyes glistening with tears. "Always," she replied. And as they held each other close, they knew their love story was one for the ages, a testament to the power of resilience, kindness, and unwavering love.
For more interesting and captivating stories, Opera Media is just a click away. Thank you for watching.